Good morning and good evening, everyone. My name is Coben Calhoun. I'm a principal with Rocky Mountain Institute, where I work with RMI's China program on power system decarbonization, and I will be moderating our discussion today. So first, I just really wanted to thank all of you for joining this live webinar hosted by Rocky Mountain Institute. In particular, I'd really like to thank our donors and supporters who've joined us today. Your support is absolutely essential to RMI's work, transforming global energy use. Today, we are very excited to share an overview of our work in China, and specifically insights from our recent report series, Putting Electric Logistics Vehicles to Work in Shenzhen, which explores how Shenzhen, a city on the southeastern coast of China, is leading an unprecedented transition from fossil fuel vehicles to all electric urban delivery vehicles, which we refer to and are also known as logistics vehicles. I'm joined here today by several colleagues and partners. I'm joined by Ting Li, the Regional Managing Director of RMI's China Program, Joe Wang, Manager of RMI's China Program and our China Mobility Lead, Dave Mullaney, the Principal of RMI's Industry and Heavy Transport Program, and Huiming Gong, who's the Senior Program Director of Energy Foundation China's Transportation Program, and who's a leading expert on China's transportation sector and a critical partner on this project. So following a short presentation in which we're going to cover the insights of our work in Shenzhen, we will open up the discussion to a question and answer session. To support this discussion, please feel free to share questions throughout the webinar using the chat function, which should just be kind of in the bottom of the dialog box on the right-hand side. So please feel free to share questions throughout the webinar, and we'll be cultivating those and bringing those back for discussion with the group after the presentation. Now, to get us started, I would like to welcome Ting Li to provide an introduction to our work in China and the importance of Shenzhen's leadership on electric vehicles. Ting?
Thank you. Thank you, Coben. Good evening, colleagues, and thank you for this great opportunity. I think it's a strong echo. Maybe we should sit separately, or you can unmute. Can you unmute? Well, thank you again. That's better. First, thank you for this great opportunity to share with you some progress of our work. And first, let me give a very quick introduction of RMI China program as a whole. And you know, from the first day of the presence here in China, about 5-6 years ago, we tried to identify and focus on the most important leverage points that RMI can uniquely advance here, and in line with our overall objective in China, which is to assist the country to set ambitions in terms of low carbon development, and also to be able to successfully achieve or surpass its climate and energy transition targets. And we wish to target at sectors with globally meaningful carbon emissions, a solution set that is focused on economic and market-based solutions, and also very important, a scalable practice that can help the whole sector to be carbon-free. We also wish to make sure that to cover both the supply side, including the power and power market and electricity system, and the demand side, including building, transportation, for example, and also for industry, which is also one important demand side elements in China. At the current stage, we also try to combine the top-down efforts. You all know that policy play a significant role here in China, and well combined with a bottom-up practice to make sure that policy-making process is well informed by the market and all stakeholders' feedbacks, and local demonstrations succeed in establishment of best practice in class to influence the whole sector. So that is a overall 5 years rationale behind everything we have been putting our efforts here in China. But as you probably have all learned about, that China has just announced a big new climate pledge, which is to try to achieve carbon neutral before 2060. So this is a kind of long-term low carbon goal or zero carbon objective combined with a near term of peaking its CO2 well before 2030. So here in China, obviously, everybody is talking about this new climate change, pledge, and every effort has put this objective at the center. And our current 3 initiatives, we have been slightly adjust or improved our initiatives, but remain the same structure because actually we have been putting the near zero carbon or zero carbon in the center of our work since 2 or 3 years ago. For example, I'll give you an example that we have established the first zero carbon demonstration pilots, which is 300 square meters in China, which also has a long-term zero carbon targets. This is 3 years ago a demonstration, and also last year we published together with the Energy Transition Commission a kind of a roadmap trajectory a report indicate how China will looks like if achieved 2050 towards a zero carbon and also a well-developed economy. So that's a report triggers somehow the internal debate of how China will looks like towards this low carbon or zero carbon road, which we believe that have helped contributed to eventually the big decision making and the new climate pledge that has been announced. So currently, very quickly, we have 3 initiatives. Number 1 is our power system transformation, as power sector is a key enabler of achieve any carbon objective, that is for sure. And our focus is how to help eventually to help design the whole system in order to move away from a thermal power and help to achieve an electricity system with more than 17 power generation from renewables. And initiative number one is energy transition. This initiative focus mostly on the hard to abate industry, and also the breakthrough pathways to cultivate zero carbon industries. And the third initiative, which is much more related to the demand side, which is the subnational carbon neutral demonstration on the ground cases to show how to achieve exactly carbon neutral, including the building sectors, including the transportation sectors. So it goes without saying, I'm sure that all of you understand, even better than me, how important the transportation sector could be. And as I mentioned that we want to be 5 years or 6 years ago when we first came here in China to do good work, we try to be value added, meaning that what else can we do to support Huiming Energy Foundation's program, to support other people's program, that seems that we can be value added. That is why we choose freight, including the urban freight, to be the directions specifically under the transportation sector. And we have done great work so far. You're probably familiar with RMI's approach, which is think, do, scale. So think meaning that you try to establish a thought leadership, and then including some viable and specific solutions to move beyond the visionary. And I believe the current report, and you will hear more from my colleagues of details, but the current report representing such thought leadership, I believe, and an advanced one. And for the do part, we paid a lot of attention at implementation of a Lighthouse Demonstration, and that is Shenzhen is the first city we choose as a Lighthouse Demonstration. 5 years ago, we actually organized the first workshop over there, and by then Shenzhen is still struggling with their climate targets, because Shenzhen is a very typical, huge, big, but still growing very fast. So I still remember the debate between, literally the conversation between me and the policymakers local. They worried about where will be, what is timeline for the peaking. So first they choose 2020, and then they feel concerned and feel, oh no, we can't do 2020. The best we can do is 2022 maybe. Why? Because they have the growing transportation emission fast, and also a growing significant emission from building sector. They said if we can control the transportation growing emission or the emission from a building, we can't achieve 2020 peaking. We can only do 2020. But I believe this year, 2020, but this year is a special case that we can, discuss later. But this year, Shenzhen have already achieved peaking for sure. So I believe the controlled, well-managed transportation sector contribute quite a lot to the significant, peaking timeline of the city, and which also demonstrate, a great experience to all the other cities who are facing the very similar challenges from the transportation sector as well as building. So EV is so important, and people care about EV. Everybody's talking about EV. All the investments are focused on at least, if there's one area that will be EV and the grid recharging storage, because it is not about how people move themselves, how the people move within the urban area. It is also showing and it triggers the the overarching designing of how effective the grid can be response to the demand side, and how the storage capacity can be deployed into the mobility sector to further enhance the integration of distributed renewables and improve the power system flexibility. So it's a transportation is important, big one, but it's far beyond transportation itself. It has a far-end implication in terms of the whole overall power system as well as the urbanization process here in China. So I will just stop here, and once again thank you all for this opportunity. Looking forward for more discussion with all of you. Thank you, Coben. Back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ting. And with that, I think we'd like to shift and start sharing some of the insights from our work. So I'll invite Jia to start the presentation, give you some of the overview of our work. Go ahead, Jia.
Yes, thanks, Coben, and thanks, Ting, for the great introduction. So good morning and good evening, everyone. My name is Joe Wang, and I'm the manager of China Transportation team. My transportation has been deeply diving into this Shenzhen electric logistic vehicles work for about 3 years, and we have a lot of interesting findings on this topic. So today, I'm happy to give you a brief introduction about this Shenzhen electric logistic vehicles optimization, this project funded by Energy Foundation China, and the key insights we learned from it. Next, please. First, a little bit background about why electrifying urban trucks matters. So on China's front, as electric logistic vehicles emit 20 to 30% less carbon than ICE ones, full electrification could contribute about 200 million tons CO2 reduction to China every year. So it provides important support, as Ting mentioned, to China's recent announced carbon neutral goal by 2060. And more broadly on global scope, IEX estimated that 1.5 gigatons CO2 emission can be reduced if all urban trucks are electrified, which also helps clean the air and reduce loss of the pollution and respiratory system related deaths. So it is clear that vehicles or logistic vehicles electrification is very important. But then why we chose Shenzhen as the pilot? I think Ting just mentioned a little bit of reasons behind it and why we chose that. But a simple answer here is that Shenzhen is the top leader in the EV field. In case that you are not familiar with it, I'll give a quick introduction. Like Shenzhen is the first tier southern China city. Like in the past 10 years, it has taken really solid steps to unlock all electrification benefits. You can see from the chart on this slide that China and US are definitely two biggest EV markets in the world. But it is super interesting if you look down there, you can see the city of Shenzhen could rank number 3 and even outperforming a lot of other countries except China and USA. So to better understand how Shenzhen accomplished this success, our mind now is actively working with it on ELVs promotion to facilitate its own path forward to full electrification and to provide suggestions for other China and international cities. So starting from 2015, Shenzhen spent only 5 years to grow ELV stock from 300 to more than 70,000. So after a close look into Shenzhen's practices, we found that there are 4 major factors guaranteeing this achievement: policy, charging infrastructure, vehicle quality, and business model. In order to deeply unlock Shenzhen's situation in these 4 factors, our MICE research team partnered with National EV Data Platform for 50,000 ELVs operational data analysis and closely engaged with local stakeholders for interviews and results understanding. And finally, we distilled all these insights to form a 6-volume series of reports articulating how these factors could improve ELV's promotion and what other cities can get from it. So now please allow me to take you a quick tour into this series of the reports. The first thing we would like to highlight is that we know vehicle stock is really important and it determines electrification progress. But here for the ELVs, utilization is also very critical, as higher utilization means real adoption and can effectively drive down costs. So for both annual operational days and daily mileage metrics, we see from the data that Shenzhen ELV's utilization is increasing a lot from 2018 to 2019. And among all the factors driving this utilization improvement, operational subsidy policy is the one that most frequently highlighted in interviews. Shenzhen is the first city in China carried out its operational subsidy policy, and it provides certain monetary support for vehicles that qualifies for 15,000 kilometer annual mileage. It also regulates several other qualification terms that, together with the mileage threshold, create overall incentives for using ELVs more. Another significant factor impacting ELV's adoption is charging infrastructure. With ELV's operational data, the team depicted Shenzhen ELV's daily charging pattern, which helps demonstrate where, when, and what types of chargers drivers prefer to use for the vehicle's charging. Results have shown that ELVs have a unique and repetitive charging pattern, as logistic vehicles need to make deliveries as efficient as possible. ELV's top charging areas are always close to places where they could easily load or deliver goods. Also, fast charging is more important and popular than slow ones, as it saves time for making deliveries, even though it could probably accelerate battery degradation. The third determining factor of ELV's utilization is vehicle quality. The research team established an evaluation system to compare ELV's vehicle technology with ICE trucks. And it turns out that ELVs, especially minivans, are almost as capable as ICE ones on delivery suitability, power, and speed, but are still lack of competency on battery performance, especially on the mileage range and battery degradation. Given that fleet drivers always have mileage anxiety, like 30 to 50% battery left, the current mileage range is still not quite enough for satisfying all those scenarios. ELVs are also having 5 to 8% battery degradation every year, which will lead to total failure after 5 years usage. And finally, for business model, self-purchasing and owning is no longer naturally dominant model for ELV's market. As ELV's price is much higher and its technical performance is not quite stable, few fleets want to buy and own an ELV with high costs and risks. So the market created a flexible leasing model under which the rental company will buy the vehicles and the fleets can only just rent them based on their time and use cases needed. Also, the leasing model can provide charging and maintenance service to the fleets. So even if self-purchasing will be saving money in longer term, leasing is still dominant in Shenzhen now, with 95% of the market, and could serve as a good cornerstone for setting up the market environment. So finally, after looking at all of this, if we take a step back to the insights and jump out of Shenzhen, we could identify that lots of places in China and globally like California, Netherlands, UK, they are actively thinking about how to electrify their urban delivery vehicles. So we summarize Shenzhen's takeaways to some starting point actions for other cities. First, Shenzhen's case proves that full urban trucks electrification is possible. So setting a guiding target with clarified goal for the whole industry. And second, there are simple fixed delivery cases that cities could think about electrify first to set up the foundations. And third, as ELVs are new products, understanding the pattern and the needs is the basis for promoting them. So data collection and analysis matters a lot. And last, policies need to change according to the promotion stages to gradually electrify from simple cases to harder ones and finally get into full electrification. And besides, some other elements are also really important supplements for example, collaboration with other jurisdictions, paying more attention to ELV utilization, but not only the stock number, infrastructure, and innovations. With opportunities and methodologies in hand, RMI is eagerly looking forward to continuing our work in this field, to scale Shenzhen's efforts up to other cities, and to use our analysis for leading to a 100% ELV world. So this is just a quick snapshot of the research. There are tons of details in the 6 reports themselves. I will recommend spend some time reading them if you are interested in, and here is a link for downloading. We are always ready to take any questions now or later. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jia. And to all the attendees and participants, I realized we had a couple of technical difficulties there in terms of tracking the slides. So we're more than happy to share the slides following the presentation. But would also like to jump into addressing some questions. There are a few that came in a little earlier ahead of the event. But please feel free to share your questions in the question box or in the chat box, and we'll be tracking those as we go along. So I thought I would start by inviting Huiming into the conversation. And Huiming, I guess the initial question that I wanted to ask for you is that China recently announced an exciting and an ambitious goal to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, as Ting referenced. What role do you envision the transportation sector and specifically urban freight playing in realizing this goal? Huiming, are you able to hear us? Okay, why don't we go ahead and jump to the next question, and we'll see if Huiming can join back in. Yes, Huiming, we can hear you. Great.
Oh, sorry for the trouble, to have my computer not sharing my screen, and also, the microphone issue. Yeah, I heard your question. First, I think, although the president has made such a pledge, but the most critical thing for next step is how to translate the pledge into the policies. So now MEE and other ministries are working very hard, try to, follow this guidance and develop relevant targets for the 14th Five-Year Plan, as well as even how to peak the carbon emissions before 2030. So now transport, although currently only 9% of the total carbon emissions in terms of the total national CO2 emissions, but they are increasing very significantly, very fast. It's expected to be double or even triple in future if without very stringent control. On the other hand, it's not just climate itself, it's also related to health protection. So far, air quality is a very important driver, not just nationally, but also locally. So that's why we think in the coming 20 years, both public health protection and climate change mitigation are going to be very important drivers compared to the past industrial policies to promote the EVs in China. Those is going to be a big difference. On the other hand, in fact, it's also related to the role of national government and local government. Definitely, national government is still very important to set up, guiding principles, guiding goals, something like that. But the local governments is critical to or responsible for local air quality improvement, and also they are going to be required to set up a kind of roadmap or targets to pick the CO2 emissions in what kind of timeline. So Shenzhen today we are discussing definitely is one of the tier 1 cities who needs to pick up the CO2 emissions. Oh,
great. No, thank you very much. And I think that actually relates to a second question that we've received, which maybe I'll direct to Jia. So China has recently also released an updated new energy vehicle development plan. So what are the implications of the new plan on China's EV market and its broader clean energy and climate goals? Huiming obviously was talking specifically to 2060 targets, but also a 14th five-year plan. So maybe provide a little bit of perspective of how this near-term, this recent plan update relates to some of those outcomes.
Yeah, thanks, Tobin. And that's a really great question. And it is just a plan coming out recently. And the people working in this sector, when they heard from that, are really excited about this plan because it set up the total direction and give people a confirmation that EV is definitely going to be the future lead in this sector. And talking about like near-term, like 14 5-year plan, that new energy vehicles development plan articulates that by 2025, 20% of the sales of the vehicles need to be new energy vehicles, which means that we have a clear direction to 14th five-year plan. And looking into the future, the plan gives out an overall policy atmosphere, which is that subsidies or kind of only relying on funding or monetary support is definitely not going to be the thing happening in the future. The market is chosen to be growing its own way a little bit more, which relies more on they encourage road restrictions on ICE vehicles or providing more road privileges to the EVs, and also providing more support on the charging infrastructure to guaranteeing that all the vehicles have enough like services to charge everywhere and where they want. So I think that is definitely a kind of near-term signal saying that we are triggering a little bit of transition from purely encouraging people to buy more of the EVs towards like triggering the market signals for people seeing, oh, EVs are kind of more cost-effective than ICEs, and thinking about ways starting from 2021 to 2035 as a this plan scope to build up the market and definitely creating the cost benefits for people themselves to think about which one is more expected for them and the EVs. And also by supplying that, the plan has also talked about a lot about how the battery technology and the vehicle technology itself can help support the EVs grow in the market. And that is also a very important element because you have some other supporting policies, but you need the EV to develop itself. So combining those two factors or elements together, we see that the plan is definitely setting the targets to an EV world and providing enough supplies on different infrastructure or supplies or services actors to guaranteeing that it's growing healthy and growing fast.
Great, thank you, Jia. So another question that I wanted to direct to Huiming. There are many other cities in China trying to follow in the footsteps of Shenzhen. What's the most important piece of advice you would give to these cities in terms of promoting electric vehicles?
Well, as I just mentioned, the national has set up ambitious targets. The question is which city, which region, and which sector are going to be the pioneer to do first. So I think Shenzhen definitely is one of the cities. So I agree with what you just mentioned. Shenzhen could be a very good city to pilot 100 EVs in future. So far we studied the work in terms of logistic trucks, but there are still more which could help them done. And on the other hand, there are other cities in different regions like Shanghai, Beijing, and even Hainan province. So we could still support them to achieve the targets. So far, Hainan has set up ambitious targets by 2030 to retire all the stop the sales of conventional vehicles. But the more challenging is how to get there. So Shenzhen's experience and other cities' experience definitely could help them. And all these cities, great job. Finally, will help build the confidence and ambitions for the nation. What we definitely want to target is the nation's transformation. So that's the logic behind that. I think we could work together.
Great, thank you. Now, Dave, you're taking a slightly different perspective on these topics, and I think some perspective that might be relevant to the audience here. Are there specific insights or outcomes from Shenzhen that are transferable outside of China? And how can other cities or industry leaders benefit from the experience in Shenzhen?
Yeah, thanks, Gobin. So I think first off, it's worth recognizing that Shenzhen is a very special place, and there's no silver bullet that says you do this exactly and you have your solution. That said, I do think that the experience from Shenzhen is incredibly relevant in a couple of ways. The first one is a look sort of beyond the headlights of where electrification is going and what cities need to do about it. So one person who read this report emailed me and said, it's like a postcard from the future. And I think that postcard is actually really valuable. Right now, there's this huge focus globally around how do we get EVs produced? How do we get EVs purchased? How do we get them, how do we stimulate this market to move? The next question you kind of ask yourself is, once supply is online and once people are buying these vehicles, is the job done? And I think what we saw in Shenzhen is, no, you need to make sure that the vehicles, once they're purchased, are actually effectively used. And so this is actually, I think, it's becoming really important globally. I think Joe sort of touched on this in his opening slides. There's a lot of international action that's about banning ICE logistics vehicles within cities, and you're seeing stuff like this happening especially a lot in Europe, Netherlands, Norway, places in the UK, Italy, I believe France. When you decide that you can't have internal combustion engines vehicles within your city, you need to make sure that your EVs can operate in a way that the overall freight system and transportation system still continues to run smoothly. And I think what we're seeing in Shenzhen is, how do you do that? What problems are EVs going to run into? And how do you address these? And I think it's really important to get out in front of that. And the example from Shenzhen, I think, can enable cities to understand what challenges are coming in or sort of in their path in the future and proactively get ahead of them. And I think there's another important aspect here, which is the methodology we use. So specifically, using vehicle travel data to try to understand how a transportation system is functioning and how it could best be electrified. And when Joe was having the stakeholder engagement meeting after we published these reports in China, one of the stakeholders there, I believe was a large fleet, said the provision of charging infrastructure has to become a part of city planning and urban planning. It's really difficult to plan for a future market that you don't understand. But that's sort of the situation we're in. This change is happening. It's going to happen very rapidly. There's not going to be time for a lot of learning by doing and incrementalism. The change has to be quick and effective. So these types of tools that we're developing, I think, can really help to support policymakers and city planners to get ready for this deluge of electric vehicles that I do believe is coming because of all of these great supply policies that we're seeing, and make sure that their cities are ready for that. And actually, a lot of these tools that we're putting together, that we started putting together in China, we've begun to migrate globally. So these approaches now that started out in Shenzhen, we're actually beginning to deploy them in cities like LA in the United States. So there is a lot of transferability there.
Great. Yeah, I think there's a lot there to unpack. In particular, obviously we spent a lot of time today talking about charging infrastructure. It's an important enabler that's highlighted in the report, and an entire report kind of dedicated to that specific topic. We also have a number of questions related to charging infrastructure coming in that are a little more targeted and specific. So maybe I'll start with the first one here from Val and direct it to you, Joe. Basically, the question is there a target number of charger per number of EVs? of ELVs based on the analysis that we're providing. And maybe you can take a second part of that and talk a little bit about thoughts on distribution of slow versus fast charging, i.e. specifically, should the number of fast chargers kind of stay at a fairly high proportion, or what does that distribution look like now and going out in the future?
Yes, Tobin. So yes, when we are looking into this electric logistics vehicles, their charging needs, and how to plan out the charging infrastructure for them, we definitely see in Shenzhen that ELVs has a growing trend of using more fast charging than slow charging. And we dived into the reasons why people feel like that and why people perform like that with stakeholders. We talked with them, and the feedback, major feedback come from them is like, as they were using the ELVs, they are benchmarking with ICE trucks all the time by delivery capability, by charging time, by efficiency, all the things. So charging time is definitely one critical metrics they were thinking about. ICE vehicles, you can just add gas really quickly within minutes. So they want to charge the vehicle as quick as possible as well. So that's the basic reason why we see ELVs in Shenzhen are using a growing trend of the fast charging than slow charging. So if we talk about ELVs in this market growing into the future, I believe in China, the plan should be tweaked a little bit towards more of the fast charging in the city, because Shenzhen has already provided some policy incentives for encouraging concentrated big charging stations that provides those charging services, and fast charging can also supply all their needs. But there is a risk of doing that. Like I mentioned, like battery degradation is kind of risking people's usage of the ELV's life. It's killing the life like less than 5 years, which is very not cost effective for people thinking about using those vehicles. So there should be a balance between fast and slow charging for people. And fast charging can grow in a steady kind of rate for the ELVs. But if we look into a broader scope of all the EVs, I believe for passenger vehicles majorly in China, slow charging would be definitely the kind of dominant method people use for charging every day. Not only like at their home, but also at workplaces, because they have a long time of the parking. And they don't need to charge every day for their vehicles, maybe just 3 times a week or 2 times a week. So slow charging can definitely supply the EV, like the passenger vehicles needs. And it can just reduce a lot of burdens of the grid and also other resources. So to give it a broad kind of a picture, I would say that in the future, definitely slow charging can dominate for passenger vehicles majorly, but also there are other usage like commercial vehicles, especially taxis, ride-hailings, and logistic vehicles who needs to charge really fast and go to their work. That fast charging can play a really important role in that sectors.
Great. And maybe just a quick response on the first part of that. Are you seeing kind of a specific proportion of chargers to ELVs in Shenzhen, or do you have kind of a rough metric in mind? Any thoughts on kind of that charging target, charger target side of things?
Well, yes. Now Shenzhen has like more than 80,000 chargers now. 30 or so thousand are fast charging. And we talked about that with local stakeholders, with experts, and also with charging operators. Looking into the future, Shenzhen is going to accelerate the pace of electrification of all types of vehicles. So the charging infrastructure needs to grow maybe the same or even faster speed. So I'd say, according to people talking, like they were by 2025 or 2030, there is going to be, I guess, 200 or 150,000 chargers maybe in Shenzhen that can supply the needs for for those vehicles needs to charge every day. This is a broad estimate by the vehicle to charger ratio, and actually how many vehicles can each charger supply for their charging. But it's going to be growing super high into a really big market, not only in Shenzhen but also in China, as the new infrastructure development plan was just carried out in China. Charging infrastructure is the hot topic of the 7 major aspects included in there. So every city, every province in China is going to grow that very fast.
Great. So we have three questions all related to charging from Anthony. So maybe we can do kind of a rapid fire quick turn on these. And maybe Dave, I know you were supporting some of this analysis as well, so maybe we'll bring you in to start with these, and then Joe, you can back them up. I guess first, do ELVs all share the same charger standards?
Yeah, so I would punt this one to Joe a little bit. I know that in China, all EVs would be on the Chinese GB standard. I'm not exactly sure what the global models are, but Joe, you understand, and Huiming also probably, I think you understand the lay of the land for China-specific infrastructure better than me. So I would invite you to elaborate on that one.
Yes, that's a really good question. So for standard, they mentioned it's all in GB standard. So for fast and slow themselves, they are in the same standards on plugs and also the lines and those other technical aspects in there. So they are the same, should be aligned with those standards. But there are different capacity for the chargers supplying here in China. For example, for slow ones, in general, there are 7 kilowatt ones. Mostly everywhere, 7 kilowatts are the slow charger for vehicles. They are not different from like for passenger vehicles and for the trucks, because they were using the same plugs. And a part of some of the electric logistic vehicles are minivans. They're very similar to passenger vehicles, so they share the same types of the chargers. That's for slow, like 7 kilowatts or maybe 5 kilowatts are the general standard here in China. But for fast ones, it's a little bit complicated as it has a range of kilowatts providing for different types of the chargers. Most of the time here we see in Shenzhen, ELVs are using a charger capacity ranges from 20 kilowatts to 60 kilowatts. That's the most frequently used chargers here in Shenzhen for ELVs. But definitely the maximum ones can range to 150 or 200 now. Charging operators are definitely increasing the capacity of those chargers. And there's another type of the charger. It can provide 150 kilowatts for a charging pile, but it has 2 to 3 plugs, which means that 2 to 3 plugs can share 150 kilowatts together. So you have one charging pile, you can serve 2 to 3 vehicles together, and they share 150 kilowatts. That is really good use of the resources, because you can serve up to 2 or 3 more vehicles at the same time by owning a single enough capacity. And those capacity, if one vehicle, it means that you can plug in as well 150 kilowatts. So in general, that's a quick scan for how the chargers look like in general for ELVs. But somehow like they are same for fast and slow, only different between the fast and slow themselves.
Joe, do you mind if I add on there and just pull out one point that I think is really relevant to a lot of the international cities that are trying to figure out what their charging infrastructure is going to look like. And it involves the high level of sharing of public fast charging infrastructure between logistics vehicles and other types of vehicles, especially commercial vehicles like taxis and ride hailing. So I think the ability to share infrastructure and to have the standards such that logistics vehicles don't sit in a bifurcated part of the market where logistics chargers only serve logistics vehicles, I think that's really important to acknowledge that in Shenzhen, a full 50% of kilowatt hours dispensed to logistics vehicles are coming from public charging infrastructure, and that charging infrastructure is shared with regular passenger vehicles, taxis, all these other commercial vehicles. And when you're thinking about how to build a lean, effective charging infrastructure, to make sure that things like differing standards don't get in the way. Because really the land and the ability to provide charging is the scarcest element in this system, and we have to make sure that we maximize the efficiency of the use of that.
Yeah, really good point. And I guess it relates to a separate question that came in from Peter, which he framed as, why can't vehicles or why aren't vehicles being slow charged where they're parked at night in terms of depots or for fleets or businesses or warehouses? So we've spent a lot of time looking at where vehicles are charging, what they're using to charge, fast versus slow. So maybe just take a couple minutes and share a little bit more of why that isn't being done as much, and or why can't it be a bigger part of the solution versus this shared fast charger option. So John, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So to clarify, do you mean why are you using fast instead of slow now? Or why slow in depot are not good enough for people?
Why aren't or why can't vehicles use slow charging more, in terms of overnight charging to meet charging needs, as opposed to really the emphasis around a large majority of vehicles using fast charging?
Yeah, sure. So I think I would start to answer that question in the angle of kind of market composition here in China, Shenzhen. Because here's the market here for the freight market is a little bit different from the one in the US. The market is really fragmented with small operators or fleets running their operations everywhere. So if you see the market share of the top 10 maybe fleets in China or in Shenzhen, they only takes about 10 or 15 of the market share. That's definitely not the case in Europe or the US. Why I'm talking about this is that if you are in that case, the kind of providing slow charging for big depot or big distribution centers or big warehouses can only serve a small portion of the vehicles here in Shenzhen or in China. So slow charging definitely works. It works for the big fleets because they have fixed and they're really same places, repetitive places to charge every day during the night. So slow charging definitely works for them, and they are a big portion of it right now. But for other small guys, for example, the one who only owns 2 to 3 vehicles and runs their own business every day by receiving orders on apps and apps, they receive order all the time, possibly. The order comes in and you need to make delivery, and you find your vehicles need to charge. Oh, how can I do that? You find fast charging or public charging that can really satisfy your needs. So that's one major reason why fast charging are growing so fast, because there are very variations of these services these kind of ELVs are providing every day. They cannot predict that very fixed, and they don't have a fixed orders every day, every month, every year. So in order to supply most of these small operators or small fleets, fast charging, like I mentioned, they are fast and they charge quickly, and they can go back to their delivery every time they want. So that is a major reason when we talk with the fleets, they mention, oh, I want fast. I want to benchmark with ICE so that I can make money. So that's basically the major reason why people would like to charge fast. And slow ones could be work, as Shenzhen is also thinking about regulating the market by guaranteeing, regulating the fleets by size of the ELVs. They were currently putting out some regulations under the operational subsidy, mentioning that a certain amount of the trucks need to be registered in case that you are qualified for the operational subsidy. So in the future, as the market grows into a more regulated way, definitely slow chargers during the night could be work, but fast charging is a thing that cannot be missed, and is really important for supplying people's needs.
Great, really helpful insight there. I want to shift gears a little bit. We just have a few minutes left, so I wanted to get maybe 2 final questions in, and wanted to start with Huiming. So there's a question here that basically is asking, how important were road access or zone restrictions and road access privileges to driving adoption of ELVs in Shenzhen. And I guess maybe a second part to that question is whether other large or tier 1 Chinese cities are adopting similar policies.
That's a very good question. Yeah, that's also why I said in future local cities could play a pretty unique role in terms of driving electrification. So road access as well as other traffic management policies could play a very important role. So far, some cities have traffic restrictions based on the number of license plate, not just the green logistic zone or others. On the other hand, I think based on the current logistic green zone, another kind of version like a low emission zone or even ultra low or zero emission zone could be another important angle in future. So far, there's some work under the process, including Beijing, Hainan, and other provinces and cities. So the target is again how to encourage the most clean vehicles. In the past, more than 80 cities in China has adopted a no emission zone to discourage the high polluting vehicles, but there is no policies to encourage the most cleanest vehicles. So that's why the importance of green logistic zone or zero emission zone policies in future. So I think definitely there is the policy space in future.
Great. So maybe we'll stay with you to start for this next question. But I think simply put, 2020 has been a pretty challenging year for the EV industry. What are the opportunities and challenges coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic for vehicle electrification in the freight sector in China?
Well, I think both good and bad news. Good news is because of the weakening economy, so the government decided to help the industries, so extend the subsidies for another 2 years. And also they realized the importance to provide a convenient charging service. So charging infrastructure is included into the next generation investment plan. So both the state grid company and the southern grid companies are putting a lot of resources to accelerate public charging services, build more charging facilities. So those are all good news. On the other hand, also local cities, we know in China, 7 cities have the license plate control policies. And so during this COVID pandemic period, and also due to the slowing economy, the license plate for the car sales. And for example, Beijing, they raised another 20,000 for EV only. So that's definitely helps the sales of the market. And on the other hand, the bad news is some kind of targets has difficult to be made. For example, China set up 2 million sales by 2020. So far, based on the market penetration, it seems like China could achieve roughly, let's say 120,000. So which is pretty less than the target 2 million annual sales. But on the other hand, we talked about the charging infrastructures. The public charging stations moves very fast, and the target could be made. But for private charging stations, slow charging stations, it's very difficult to achieve that target. So I want to add another one point about the challenges for slow and fast charging. Land supply, land use, and urban planning is very critical. And when we talk to no matter public vehicle fleet or private consumers, both of them complains that how to build the charging infrastructures. So that's the thing in China which is different probably from US and Europe, because most lands are owned by the government, and also it's very difficult to build private charging stations in the residential area because of high elevated, very condensed living areas. So just stop here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And with that, we're just about at time. So wanted to thank everyone again for joining. I think we're just always appreciative of the support and the opportunity to share our experience with our work in China and around the world with other impassioned and engaged folks. So We're happy to, as Jess said, we're happy to answer questions. If you want to email us directly, please download the report. We'd be happy to follow up with you. And I hope everyone has a good evening or a good morning, whichever time zone you're calling in from. And thank you again. We'll be sure to share follow-up information, including the slides, with everyone after we sign off. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.